So,
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Building Free Life, the Theology of Democratic Modernity at Edinburgh Anarchist Feminist Book Fair 2021. If you're joining us for the first time, please take a moment to look over our Safer Space Agreement, which is available to read on our website. I'll post a link in the chat. The website, you can also check out the book fair stalls and the full program for today. As ever, the book fair is made possible by people giving their time and labor. All donations we take go directly to the speakers and organizations taking part. So if you can, please consider donating via our PayPal. Again, I will drop the link in the chat on YouTube. We're always keen to hear feedback about how we can improve the book fair next year and make our programming and our spaces more accessible. If you have thoughts you'd like to share after the event, please drop us a line via the feedback page on the website. You will be able to see this video recorded on our YouTube channel. And well, thanks everyone for coming. I'll now hand over to Sarah Glen, who is a member of the Scottish Solidarity with Kurdistan.
So hello everybody, and particularly welcome to people who've come to this on the first day of summer, but also welcome to those who are watching it in the cooler evening. Yeah, I'm Sarah Glen. I work with Scottish Solidarity with Kurdistan, and you can find us on Facebook. Just search for us. I'm really pleased to be able to be here and to welcome Nazan to speak to us today and to tell us more about the philosophy of Abdullah Öcalan. So Nazan is an academic, but she also writes more journalistic pieces as well. She did her PhD in Indiana University, and she's been an assistant professor at Boğaziçi University in Istanbul, which some of you may have seen. There's been major protests there from the students recently because they've had a head foisted on them by the government that they didn't want. So, but anyway, you don't really want to listen to me. You want to listen to Nazan. She's a member of Women for Peace. She's a member of Academics for Peace. And I'm sure she's got a lot to say to us. Just a few practical things. If you've got questions, please put them on YouTube and I will put them to her afterwards. When she's spoken, I hope there'll be a lot of time for questions because I'm sure there's a lot of things that we all want to ask her. So can I hand over to you, Nazan?
Thank you for your generous introduction, Sarah. I'm going to start by reading a little bit from the introduction of this book. It's called Building Free Life, Dialogues with Öcalan. The introduction is written by International Initiative Freedom for Abdullah Öcalan Peace in Kurdistan. To contextualize my piece, why we felt the need to discuss Öcalan's ideas as academics and how this book was brought together. And then I will present a few of the ideas I have tried to develop in this book, in my section on the in the book. So let me read first what the book is all about. The book, so the massive transformation that Kurdish society has undergone in the last 40 years did not primarily happen through books. In a culture that relies heavily on oral literature, songs, conversation, and word of mouth, speeches and personal dialogue have been very important. Öcalan, although he authored several books in the 1970s and 1980s, and a total of more than 60 to date, 12 of them in prison, is mainly a man of the spoken word and of dialogue. This makes his prison conditions since 1999, the total isolation and absence of dialogue, all the harder. Dialogue became monologue, and his only way to communicate with an audience was to write court submissions, his so-called defenses or prison writings. In the face of a possible genocide, he did not formulate an individual defense, but acted as a spokesperson for his people, and eventually for all the oppressed peoples in the Middle East. But still, it is not fair to speak of a monologue. Abdullah Öcalan's writings, first addressed to various courts in Turkey and Europe, and subsequently published, did initiate a form of dialogue. The essays communicate with storytellers from mythological pasts, as well as with living intellectuals, with companions who know him personally, and unknown readers on other continents, with supporters and opponents alike, even with his long deceased mother. His writings are being translated, some of them as many as 20 languages, and are read and discussed by people all over the world. The International Initiative and many others have taken up this dialogue and discussed his ideas with people who are also waving and building a free life. In many countries and places, we try to further the dialogue with and between the young, women, anarchists, libertarian socialists, social ecologists, autonomists, indigenous peoples, workers, and all those whose hearts, minds, and praxis are dedicated to furthering the quest for a free life. This book is our attempt to reflect those discussions and dialogues and the process of learning from one another. So the book is divided in 4 sections, and section 1, introductions, backgrounds, postscripts, consists mainly of writings that have been published as forewords or afterwords to translations of Öcalan's book. Section 2, the origins of civilization, engages with Öcalan's writings that give a comprehensive account of human history. So in the first section, you have essays from Norman Peach, Eckhard Zimmermann, Arnoldo Otegi, John Holloway, Immanuel Wallerstein, Antonia Negri, and Barry Gills. And in the second section, the origins of civilization, you have Donald H. Matthews, Thomas Jeffrey Miley, Muriel Gonzalez Athenas. And section 3 adds a spatial and comparative perspective to Öcalan's ideas. It compares his writings with what happened in the Balkans, in India, and in Mexico. And Andrei Gurbacic, Rada de Souza are writing in these, and Raul Zibeci. And section 4, political philosophy and political action, discusses practical aspects of Öcalan's methodology and theory. And this is where I have also contributed. David Graeber, Mechthild Exo, Fabian Schiedler, Damien Graeber, Shannon Brinkat, all of these have contributed to this section. And as I said, my essay is also in this section, and it's called The Theology of Democratic Modernity, Labor, Truth, and Freedom. And as Sarah said, what I am trying to do here is to compare Öcalan's thought on Kurdish movements theology or Kurdish movements metaphysics, and how he has tried to decolonize the thought of Kurdish movement from the theological aspects of democratic modernity. And I will be addressing these issues now. So my essay starts with a discussion of İmralı prison, where Öcalan has been isolated. And this prison is a very special prison. Öcalan was for a long time the only person in this prison. And it's interesting to me that many different countries have also island prisons. What does an island prison mean? Why are certain people put in island prisons? What kind of an exclusion, what kind of an isolation does an island prison imply? What does it say about space? These are really interesting questions to me. But more interesting is, how a space of exclusion and of isolation that the state has created for Öcalan has been transformed into a threshold for people, and how people's labor and Öcalan's labor has transformed this space of exclusion into a space of possibility, into a space of threshold and opening to newness, and opening to togetherness, through his writings, and other means, and people's insistence on seeing Öcalan, how people's labor have also trust. So it's a reciprocal relationship. It's a reciprocal relationship which is similar to gift giving to each other. The people giving gifts to Öcalan, Öcalan giving gifts to people in forms of books, in forms of ideas, and people actually making hunger strikes in order for him to have access to his lawyers, which is actually his legal right. So my first section is on that, because I see İmralı as a place around which we can develop discussions about what non-sovereignty means. Sovereignty has been a very important term in political philosophy for the last few years, and how sovereignty is actually a license to violence, how sovereignty is the right to exercise violence. And so through this prison, I'm thinking about what kind of political communities we can have that do not necessarily rely on sovereignty, but on something that is, I call the opposite of sovereignty, that is developed through gift giving. Now, this is the first section of my essay, but actually what I am, of course, interested in this essay is how come people are giving their lives? How come people are going to the mountains knowingly that their lifespan is going to be very short, and they are fighting for Kurdistan, for the freedom of Kurdistan? What kind of a metaphysics, what kind of a theology makes them do these things? Because what we see more and more in the world is that when we, there has been so many insurgencies, right? In the last decade, we have seen maybe the biggest insurgencies that has, for example, what happened in Tahrir Square. Millions and millions of people came together. Or what we have seen with Black Lives Matter. Thousands, hundred thousands, millions of people have taken the streets. Or what we have seen in Turkey in Gezi protests, what we have seen in Brazil against Bolsonaro, what we have seen in Chile in the last couple of years, what we have seen in Lebanon. These are really what we are seeing in Algiers, right? For a couple of years now, these protests are continuing. So we have all these countries, and in all these countries, there is this huge desire to change the world and to be part of something bigger than themselves, to transform the world. And then yet they peak, and then suddenly they subside and they disappear. But what differentiates Kurdish movement is Kurdish movement has been going on for 40 years. And what I suggest in this section is basically this is possible because it tries what Öcalan has done and what has been reciprocated by the people, reciprocated by PKK militants, is they have given a new meaning to the world where their kind of militant activity makes sense and actually elevates them. So this is what I was interested in. And Öcalan has a very critical, very sound, very material, very groundbreaking, I would say, critical analysis of capitalist modernity. And he identifies certain aspects of the theology of capitalist modernity. And he wants to replace this theology with the, and he wants to replace this with the metaphysics of a democratic modernity. How would a democratic modernity look like? How would we feel in that kind of other kind of civilization? Let's put it that way. So he says, or he doesn't explicitly say it, but he explores what is sacred, what are the unquestionable values, what are the building blocks of capitalist modernity. And these are, I suggest, nation, property, and family. Nation, property, and family are the building blocks of capitalist modernity. They are sacred spaces of capitalist modernity that cannot be questioned, or that even when they are questioned, those who are questioning them are called terrorists, are called non-human in a sense. So nation, property, and family are the building blocks of the theology of capitalist modernity. The idea of progress is the idea of salvation, if you want. The idea of progress breathes life to these spaces. And commodification is the interpretative grid that holds capitalist modernity together. So there is nation, property, and family as the building blocks of capitalist modernity, the idea of progress. So it's like similar structurally to idea of salvation that breathes life to our activities. And then commodification is the interpretative grid. I'll talk about these in page 244, but I don't want to actually read it if it becomes necessary, if then I read it. But in page, maybe I read it. Yeah. Nation, property, and family are the building blocks of capitalism as a system and a theology. They are constructs that shape belonging and embodiment and determine the significance of people, things, and events. They have also been rendered untouchable by an attributed holiness and placed beyond legal questioning. In capitalism, having a nation, property, and family is almost like a form of worship. What gives content to and injects constant life into property, nation, and family is progress, the motor of the operational system of capitalist modernity, which is kept outside of political debate and hence remains beyond challenge. Without the idea of progress, most institutions of capitalist modernity, its factories, bridges, nuclear plants, buildings, and apartment complexes would become hollow. Indeed, Benjamin's work has brilliantly shown that as the fetishized objects of progress change, and as progress disinvests itself of a formerly fetishized object, the latter rots and falls into ruin. Finally, commodification is the interpretative grid of capitalist modernity and the glue that holds it together, rendering distinct spaces, temporalities, belongings, events, and experiences commensurate. Commodification enables the measurement, quantification, and exchange of value, and ensures that all relationships take place in real or symbolic markets, and that all feelings, life, and action can be replaced. Increasingly, more things are integrated into the market, including care, memory, pain, and become meaningful on the basis of the price tags placed on them. So this is how Öcalan talks about capitalist modernity as a theology, and this theology is what gives our lives meaning, how we move, why we wake up in the morning, if you want, for our family, property, and why we go out and structure our everyday life. So Öcalan wants to replace this. Sylvia Wynter, the Caribbean theorist, Sylvia Wynter would call Öcalan's move, I think, she has become very important in the last couple of years. Many people are giving reference to her. That's why I am bringing her onto the table too, because my next work concerns a comparison between Öcalan's thought and Sylvia Wynter's thought. She would call this decolonization of being, truth, and freedom. So Öcalan comes up with new ways of understanding being, truth, and freedom, so that he can replace this theology with a new metaphysics that will give meaning to people's lives. What is this new metaphysics? Well, first of all, he's inspired by quantum physics. For Öcalan, one of the biggest mistakes, one of the biggest problems in capitalist modernity is that all disciplines are divided and we don't have a holistic picture of society. So he brings natural sciences and social sciences together. He's very much inspired by biological sciences, but also by quantum physics. And he sees that movement through quantum physics, he sees that movement should be the building block of our new theology. How can we achieve movement instead of stabilization in these institutions like family, property, that enclose us, captures us, makes us captive? Instead of that, how can we move between spaces? So he envisions new institutions. These institutions is academies, commons, and cooperatives. And the way in which we can move through these institutions is through friendship. So he proposes friendship as a way of relating to each other instead of institutions of family, property, and nation, instead of capitalism, nationalism, and familism, as he calls it. Friendship. How does friendship enable us to move, and what kind of different institutions can we envision that will make movement and non-capture, non-enclosure a way of being? And instead of progress, what does blow life, breathe life into these institutions? It will be a search for truth, a search for truth. Sorry. By a search of truth, I mean a lot of different things. If there's a question, I can explain what I mean by a search of truth. But Öcalan has different understandings of truth. One is recovery of the truth. The other is creation of truth. So those both are going to breathe life into these institutions. And finally, instead of commodification, the interpreted grid, as I said, is gift giving. How can we establish equal, reciprocal relationship that are not bound or that are not mediated through commodity, but that are real face-to-face relationships, a face-to-face labor and investment into each other. So these are all in his books, but not only in his books, in the practices of the institutions that the Kurdish movement developed. And what I suggest in this section is this is what makes it sustainable. There is always, apart from ideology, what we need in any social movement is also a metaphysics of movement. What is the meaning to take these certain questions out of the brackets they have been put into and address them loudly and give answers to them? Why do I live? Where do I go from here? What gives meaning to my life? Who am I? Who was I? How can I change? I mean, these are the questions that any social movement needs to address to be sustainable and to be revolutionary, and explicitly replace and decolonize being, truth, and freedom that has been enforced on us by capitalist modernity. Well, I think here I will make a pause. I think I maybe have grappled with many different ideas. I hope there are questions. I can maybe further talk about them, but here I make a stop.
Thank you very much. I haven't been sent any questions from YouTube yet, but I hope that people are busy getting their, well, let's say pens going, their fingers going. Meanwhile, perhaps I could just say, I mean, the meaning, the way things give meaning is just so impressive. I mean, I had a very, very short visit to northern Syria, and certainly that's what so much struck me, that the people, even, you know, just the ordinary people, by getting involved in things, yeah, everything was getting a meaning. And one of the things that, you know, thinking about it coming back, and it's a word you've not actually used, and I just wondered, is politics. And to me, one of the things that was striking was that there wasn't a division between politics and the rest of life, and that they were living politics, doing politics. And in the UK, we see a lot of people, a lot of social groups and society wouldn't actually run without ordinary people being involved, but often they're quite proud of not being political. And in as I was seeing it in Syria, and I'm sure the sort of things that you're describing as well, people are actually proud to be political. And I wondered if you'd like to comment on the use of that word and what politics actually means to the Kurdish movement.
Thank you. Politics means decision making, in a sense. And if we are going to call politics decision making, then any and every minute of our lives are politics, because we choose and we make decisions. And I think what the Kurdish movement manages to do is to show, to reveal the political character of our lives, because we make so many decisions. And they want to, what happens in Rojava is that everything of many decision-making processes has become collectivized and repoliticized, because normally in capitalist modernity, how are decisions structured? Well, the most important political decisions are made by certain people that we have once elected, right? So we elect, that's the decision we make, and then they actually make the everyday decisions about how a country will be run, etc. And then we have our everyday life that we lead with habit, without really questioning many of the things. We do them because they are habitual, because they have been done so, or because we don't really think about them. What the Kurdish movement does is politicize all these levels. Like what I do in my everyday life is political, because I make decisions and they need to be rethought. They need to be rethought in according to revolutionary ideals, according to the metaphysics I have described, and they have to be made collective. They cannot be individualized. Many of them are not individual precisely because they are political. And the same goes for the decisions made in high places. They have all these assemblies now, where all the decisions are made in assemblies, and no one particular individual can be elected for office and then make all the decisions. So I would say political, making things political, or recognizing that everything is political, actually. All the decisions we make are political. It brings also freedom, because we are freed from our habits, we are freed from hierarchies, we are freed of things that have captured us. And that's why I think North Syria, when you go to North Syria, you feel freedom is in the air. Yeah, those are the things I would say. I hope they answered your question.
Thank you. Yes. No. I mean, definitely, one felt that well, freedom and just a joy in life. Yeah. I think we've still not. You've got questions from YouTube, so you can have another one from me. And I'm sure this is one that actually, a lot of people will be asking. Is, we hear what it's like in Rojava. What can we learn from these ideas in Scotland, in other places, to bring into movements in other places? How can we learn from them?
Well, I think it's really important to ask questions about being and freedom and truth. I think many in the West or in Scotland, but I live in Germany right now. I'm an academic in exile, and I feel in Germany, what bothers me most is people act as if all these questions have been answered once and for all. And that's why I call it a theology. It's as if there's a religion that you feel which structures people's lives, family, property, nation, and the belief in progress, and the belief in freedom equals commodification. I think these needs to be taken out of the brackets in which they have been put. People need to ask these questions again about being, freedom, and truth. That's what Sylvia Wynter has also suggested. In order to decolonize, we have to ask these basic questions. Who am I? I mean, it's a very basic question, but we assume that this question should be answered, for example, in psychoanalytical terms. But there are other kinds of ways in which we can answer this question in terms of our, for example, female lineage. Where does that female lineage go? When I think about that female lineage, how do I redefine myself? I think these are very important questions, and it seems to me in the West, these questions, people pretend as if these, or not, people don't pretend, but institutions work as if all these questions have been answered once and for all. But revolutionary subjectivity means readdressing those questions. And what is very exciting for me is that Kurdistan is therefore right now talking not only, I mean, it's not only a political place, but it's also a very philosophical space where people talk about the universe and being and freedom and truth. And that makes them mobile. That makes them wanna give their lives for something greater than themselves. That's all the things I would say, if that makes sense.
Thank you. And we now have some questions from Facebook. So the first question from Junior Osterwald. Absolutely brilliant talk. Could you expand a bit on the relation between genealogy and Western traditions of anarchism and feminism? And further, what role is there for sexual minorities in the Kurdish struggle?
Well, genealogy and Western tradition of anarchism and feminism, definitely genealogy is the science of life and woman that Kurdish freedom, women's freedom movement has come up with. For those who don't know it, I mean, they don't use the word feminism, they don't use necessarily the word womanism, but they use this word genealogy to designate a science of women for and of life. I think they have learned, and that's what they say, at least, they have learned a lot from anarchism and feminism. And they one of the heritages they claim as their own is definitely feminism and anarchism. But there are other traditions, other heritages on which they have built genealogy, and one of them is Mesopotamian mythology, for example. And the other one is their own guerrilla experience. So it is closely related with feminism and anarchism, but yet it is different because it claims other traditions, other heritages, and with those other heritages and other traditions, it sometimes comes to create forms of praxis that is different from those that have been developed by feminism and anarchism. Sexual minorities in the Kurdish struggle, that's a difficult question because it's for Kurdistan, as you know, although Kurdish freedom movement is a movement of Kurdistan, for example, in Bakur, in Turkish Kurdistan, and in Rojava and in Bashur, there are certain differences. In Bakur, for example, there is a very strong Kurdish sexual minority movement, and that challenges, transforms, and teaches and learns from Kurdish freedom movement. And they are in alliance in HDP, for example, and they act together. And as I said, they learn from each other. But in Bashur and in Syria, there are no strong sexual minority movements. I think the more sexual minority movements grow and become stronger in those areas, the more we will see the consequences of it in the philosophy of Kurdish freedom movement. Because in the, yeah, that's what I could say.
It was certainly very, I mean, there was a lot of people from sexual minorities in the May the 8th demonstrations in Istanbul and places, weren't there?
Yeah.
We've got another question from Hannah Frank. Thank you so much for the interesting talk. I was wondering if you could please expand on the point about Öcalan including quantum physics in his theology through movement and relationship.
Right, I can to a limited extent, because this has not, I want to work on that more before giving comprehensive responses, because I don't know quantum physics as much as Öcalan knows. I just know how he uses it. He uses it, for example, I can give just a second. In the article that I have written, I give this as epigram. When I think of the wave-particle dilemma, which is the cornerstone of the universe, I would without hesitation emphasize that energy is freedom. I believe that the material particle is a pocket of imprisoned energy. Light is a state of energy. Can one deny the free flow of light? We must make into consideration that quanta are defined as energy's smallest particle state and are today almost seen as the factor that explains all diversity. Quantum motion is the creative power of all diversity. I cannot resist asking whether this is the God that humanity has been searching for all along. So this is a quote from Öcalan. So the movement of quanta and quantum physics for him has been crucial in developing his own understanding of freedom. What is freedom? Freedom is not being captured, not being predictable, being always in motion. But also that's borrowed from quantum physics, but from philosophy, he borrows the idea that freedom is meaning giving. How do these come together? And he tries to use, again, quantum physics to explain both movement and meaning giving. But as I said, I didn't work on this as I should have. And that's why my answers are going to be unsatisfactory in that realm.
Well, thank you very much. Not unsatisfactory at all. I think we've still not got more from the floor, but I can go on for questions for ages. And I was wondering, I mean, you were talking about it as dialogue and his ideas as dialogue, and obviously, I mean, sadly, it's many years, I think, that since Öcalan has been able to actually communicate with the outside world. But before that, there was communication, and obviously before he was imprisoned, there was discussion. And I was wondering if you could address at all, particularly the role that women within the PKK have themselves taken in developing some of the ideas, and particularly the ideas of the women's freedom within the movement.
Well, the Kurdish freedom movement, because of Öcalan actually, and rather Öcalan ideas and the struggle in the Kurdish movement led by women, ally themselves in really creative ways, let me put it that way. And Öcalan has definitely, has his theories are based on especially, since mid-90s, he has been seeing as women's freedom as the most crucial form of freedom in the world, because women are the first colony, and without it's going to be women who are going to free society. Women have been robbed the means of production, means of decision making, means of self-defense by man, and people have been robbed means of self-defense, means of production, and means of self-governance, decision making. People have been robbed by the state. So women need to take these means back in order to free society and in order to free themselves. Therefore, our actually Kurdish freedom movement defines itself as a women's movement. It is an ethnic movement, but it also defines itself as a women's movement. It is also an ecological movement. It is also a movement with universalist ambitions. But the defining characteristics of the movement is that it is a women's movement, that its analysis of society states that since women are the first colony, it is only through women's freedom that society can be freed. It is not true the freedom of Kurdish people. It is not true the freedom of the working class. These are all necessary, all important, but it is only when women free themselves and claim back means of production, means of decision-making, and means of self-defense. That is, if they develop their autonomous spaces of economy, their autonomous spaces of self-defense, etc., and empower themselves and claim these means back from men, that is when society will be freed. So there is this deep feminism, if you want, in Western vocabulary, a deep, deep feminism in Kurdish freedom movement and Abdullah Öcalan's thought. And this is reciprocal. Abdullah Öcalan has seen and theorized the importance of the figure of the women and the importance of women's freedom. But also, the more he has done that, the more women have joined the Kurdish freedom movement, and they have promoted and they have led a very important women's struggle in the Kurdish movement against man.
So, I mean, one of the things that struck me as well with the feminism in the movement is it of course it's not just addressed to women, is it? It's about changing the way men are. So it's as much addressed to men and about making just a much nicer society. And certainly what I've been very struck by, and I'm sure that others from the left will recognize this, that, you know, we've probably all been in movements where some of the people you call comrade, you think, hang on a minute, they want to stab me in the back some other time, you know, and in the Kurdish movement, they really do seem to have worked much harder at the personal relationship side of things, and that also feeds into the radical democratic side of things. And I wonder if you could say a bit more about how Öcalan's ideas really make that possible. Why have they been able to succeed in this in a way that a lot of movements haven't?
Well, actually, I will, in certain ways, I hope I did address that question because I think it is through this metaphysics that I have been talking about. Friendship, for example. Friendship is a very, very important notion, and how a real friendship can be developed within Kurdish movement has been a crucial question that Öcalan addressed through his books. Because, of course, when Kurdish women and men enter the movement, they are very much shaped by the sorts of relationships and sorts of roles that are given to them by society, right? Femininity, being a lover, being an owner, being a family member. These are all things that shape our subjectivity. How can we transform our subjectivity? By creating other forms of relationships. And the form of relationship that is promoted in the Kurdish movement is friendship. But how can a proper form of friendship that is respectful, but also loyal, also supportive of each other, also freeing, not capturing, but freeing, how can such a relationship be accomplished? Öcalan has long speeches about this. He has books about this, and since the beginning of 90s. And I think in that sense, the personal has never, ever been delinked from the political in the Kurdish movement. On the contrary, the personal is the most political, because it is how you answer the question, who am I and what's the meaning of my life? You raise and address and answer that question in your very, very private, very, very specific, very, very singular ways. And Öcalan has invited people to talk and to think about those very singular ways and how political they are and how important they are. How, I hope this has somehow addressed.
But sometimes when you say that the personal is the political, it can become very self-centered, and the Kurdish movement absolutely isn't. So how has it been turned out into a community thing rather than hustle, just being indulgent to ourselves?
Well, I'm not sure whether personalist political necessarily needs to be indulgent or needs to be self-centered. By personal and personalist political, what I mean is things about personal life cannot be bracketed, cannot be they need to be collectively, politically answered. Questions about our private life, like what kinds of relations do we lead, what kind of personal, what kind of questions do we give, what kind of responses do we give to the question of who am I, how I want to live. These are questions that needs to be collectively addressed. And I think that's what the Kurdish movement has accomplished. And that's what I mean by personalist political.
And also people helping each other to develop. I mean, the positive criticism. I've got another question from, I was going to say the floor, but the big wide outside world, from Jakub Kowalewski. Thank you for the talk. I wonder if you could say a bit more about the role of the state in the theology of capitalist modernity and its role in your, Öcalan's, alternative metaphysics.
Well, the state is very important, of course, in capitalist modernity. But in Öcalan's modernity, there is no place for state, let me put it that way, because state is exactly that which confiscates the means of decision-making, self-defense, and production away from the people. And what Öcalan wants, what is revolutionary about his thought, what is revolutionary about the Kurdish freedom movement, is they want to take it back from the state. They want to take it back as people from the state, as women from men, and as poor people from the rich. So in that sense, state needs to be made obsolete by making all decisions collective. And therefore, state doesn't have on the contrary, it's for Öcalan, there is capitalist modernity, and capitalist modernity, the institutions of capitalist modernity are state, property, nation. When I say nation, what I mean is actually nation state, property, family, and then we have a history of democratic modernity, all the praxis that has challenged capitalist modernity and build a history of its own. And that's where our heritage lies. And this is a heritage of non-stateness, a heritage of non-stateness.
That's going to lead very well onto the final question. And I wonder if in answering this question, you'd also like to do a sort of general rounding up, because we've got about 5 more minutes. So that the final question was really focusing specifically on ecology. And so Öcalan's theory is pointed to an ecology-based decentralized society, which you've just said. How did he come up with a solution, and specifically the role of the Kurds as a pioneer for ecological theory in the Middle East. So yes, if you could generally round up, but also talk about specifically the how the ecology side fits in.
Well, I mean, these are, of course, these have not happened by Öcalan reading in prison. It has happened through praxis, through what he has seen and what the Kurdish movement has experienced. And the Kurdish movement has experienced really is one of the few people without a state, and they have experienced different forms of oppression, different forms of massacre, genocide, all of that. And one has been the genocide of their nature, right? Through bombs, through building dams, through resettlement, through the destruction of archaeological sites, through the destruction of rivers and forests as counterinsurgency tactics. So basically, the nature of Kurdistan has been a battlefield, has been made into a battlefield, and destruction of the nature was is still one of the most important counterinsurgency tactics that the Turkish nation state has adopted against Kurds. And therefore, Kurds have a consciousness about why and how nature is being destroyed by certain forces against the interests and the will of people. And that's why they have an ecological consciousness. And that's why they regard themselves to be potential pioneers of the ecological movement in Kurdish movement. But don't forget, I always say potential, because this involves struggle. It doesn't happen automatically. Certain Kurdish people would maybe still be non-ecological, of course they are, and they want to, development and progress and so on and so forth. But because Kurdish people have on the ground experienced the harms of ecological disaster as a counterinsurgency tactic, they have a consciousness, ecological consciousness. And in many ways, I think we can generalize that. Oppressed people are more political because they experience these as counterinsurgency tactics: ecological destruction, gender inequality, progress, development. They live this, they experience this as counterinsurgency tactics. And that's why they have other forms of consciousness, and they want to decolonize being, truth, and freedom. I hope this was an okay wrap up.
Thank you very much. And yeah, just at the moment, Turkey is cutting off most of the water from the Euphrates to Syria. So it's just an ecological disaster for people who are trying to do so much. I've also shared the Make Rojava Green Again link, should be shared on YouTube. So thank you very, very much. So much more that we could learn and discuss. So we'll just have to read your book and the book that you've contributed to. And there's many, many more things that people can read and learn about on the web, on paper, and just get involved with and use to inspire us in our own lives. It's just a very inspirational